Between the relatively recent success of the Artemis 2 mission and the fact that every event that I've covered so far on this show has dealt with its share of misery to say the least, I've decided to choose something a little bit lighter to discuss. But don't worry, I'll get my sick kicks back in the next video. The Apollo 11 moon landing was the final culmination of the space race and the result of a decade-long national goal set by President John F. Kennedy in May 1961. On May 25th, Kennedy proposed to Congress the goal of landing a man on the moon and bringing it back safely to Earth before the year 1970. This was in direct response to the Soviets' early demonstration of what would become the space race, which was a Cold War competition between the United States and the USSR, who were both fighting for supremacy in space science and exploration. This of course began in 1957, when the Soviets launched the very first artificial satellite, known as Sputnik 1. On April 12, 1961, just 1 month before Kennedy would address Congress regarding America's race to the moon, the Soviets would succeed again when they launched cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin in a 108-minute flight aboard his Vostok 1 capsule, making him the very first man to ever go to space. On February 20th, 1962, the United States would catch up to them with the Mercury 7 capsule when that was launched. The Mercury 7, or Friendship 7, was a group of 7 military pilots selected to be America's first ever astronauts. Among them was John Glenn, the first ever American to orbit the Earth, having completed a total of 3 orbits, whereas Yuri Gagarin had only completed just 1. There was also Alan Shepard, who was the first ever American to go to space on May 5th of 61, with Virgil L. Grissom coming in second. On September 12th, Kennedy officially reaffirmed the United States' commitment to landing a man on the moon. Delivering this iconic speech at Rice University in Houston, Texas, Kennedy argued that this challenge would organize the best of American energy and skills, saying, quote, "If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man, in his quest for knowledge and progress, is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not, and it is one of the greatest adventures of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of any other nations can expect to stay behind in the race for space." Unquote. This emphasis on American determination left a profound impact on the general public and further heightened the nation's unwavering mission to make it to the moon. Unfortunately, a short time later, something would happen that would devastate the American people and fuel America's determination even more. On July 16, 1963, cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova became the first ever woman in space, completing a total of 48 orbits, which was more than both John Glenn and Yuri Gagarin combined. To make matters worse, well...
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
President Kennedy's assassination would be a massive body blow, no pun intended, to both America and their involvement in the ongoing race. As a result, Lyndon B. Johnson leveraged the tragedy to rally public support and secure continuous funding in order to fulfill Kennedy's goal, renaming Cape Canaveral to Cape Kennedy and establishing the Kennedy Space Center to ensure that the fallen president's vision would still be withstanding. By late 1964, NASA's budget was increased almost 500%, and the lunar landing program established by President Johnson eventually involved over 34,000 NASA employees and 375,000 employees of industrial and university contractors. Back in Soviet Russia, things were beginning to heat up fast. In March 1965, cosmonaut Alexei Leonov was selected to fly on the Vostok 2, of which he would perform the first ever spacewalk. Not long after that, NASA would rush to the charge by conducting the first American spacewalk with the Gemini 4 mission. On June 3rd, Ed White became the first American to walk in space, being out in the open for a total of 23 minutes and using a handheld oxygen jet gun to maneuver himself around. On July 14th, America would again take a major leap ahead of the curve when the satellite Mariner 4 took 22 images of what would be the very first successful close-ups of Mars. This was during a time when the Soviets were actively trying to reach Mars with its own probes, and America's flawless execution of the Mariner 4 demonstrates superior deep space capabilities. Sadly, the United States would suffer yet another body blow with the failed Apollo 1 mission in January 1967. 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, were participating in the launch rehearsal when a fire broke out in the oxygen cabin, killing them from asphyxiation. The event had a major impact on safety improvements regarding space travel and design, and the mission was officially named Apollo 1 in honor of the crew. 1967 would tragically prove to be a deadly year for the space race, when months just after the Apollo 1 disaster, Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov failed to deploy the parachute of his Soyuz 1 capsule, making him the first ever man to die in space. As the decade closed, America was finally beginning to win the race with an iron fist. In December 1968, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders went on the very first ever crewed mission to orbit the moon, Apollo 8. In 1969, an estimated 400,000 scientists, engineers, and technicians across NASA universities would come together for a historic mission sought after greatly by the United States. That summer, Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Michael Collins launched from the Kennedy Space Center on July 16th in their lunar module, Eagle. Finally, on July 20th, 1969, Armstrong and Aldrin became the very first men to ever walk on the lunar surface, while Collins stayed behind. All of it was broadcast on television.
That's one small step for man.
Over the next few days, Armstrong and Aldrin would set up the command module Columbia and also conducted many experiments while on the moon. These experiments included the solar wind composition experiment and the passive seismic experiment, as well as geological sampling. On July 24th, the crew departed from the moon and landed safely in the Sea of Tranquility. With Apollo 11, the United States had effectively won the race, but that wasn't necessarily the end of it. There was also the harrowing Apollo 13 mission in April 1970, as well as the historic Apollo-Soyuz test project in 1975. But Apollo 11 ultimately is considered as the triumphant nail in the coffin that proved not only how far people could go with space science, but also fulfilled Kennedy's vision and America's space supremacy, while also giving us Tang and a whole bunch of other shitty marketing tie-ins.